Oh, Victoria 3. It's not long to go now until release. On my last video about Victoria 3 last month, we spoke about all the changes to war in Victoria 3 in comparison to Victoria 2, and why it caused such a stir within the community. Over the past few months though, Victoria 3 has been developed significantly, and we are finally beginning to see the game come together, which is due to the developer diaries and monthly updates Paradox give us. I therefore wanted to do a follow-up video on Victoria 3, and give you guys an overview of what the game exactly entails, and why I believe it will be somewhat successful, provided all goes to plan. Sometimes it's the little things that make the difference, and hearing the game developers talk about the game, you can tell they've really put the effort in, and hopefully will bring us a good product that I'm sure hundreds of thousands of Victoria 2 players have waited for. The game is going to be unique, and perhaps this could get a completely new audience. Also, we are still trying to hit 75,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you like this sort of content, please consider clicking that button. Right, without further ado, let's get into this. So now we have more detail on what exactly war entails in Victoria 3. I wanted to give you a complete rundown on this aspect, and discuss whether it will be fun and enjoyable for you. Now, the game developers suggest that war is fundamentally based on pillars, and the most important of these is that war is a continuation of diplomacy and is strategic. We already discussed this in my last video, but in summary, this is very radical and different to other Paradox games, where war is very much tactical. In simple terms, you can no longer be fighting 5 wars at a time, bankrupt, broken, and still win the war with your brilliant sieging maneuvers. That's in the hands of your Victoria 3 generals now. Instead, you are the big brains behind the operation, and you have to tell your generals exactly what to do. The battles are now fought on fronts between the two countries, and a lot of factors influence the success of the battles, from how many troops you have, to the amount of resources you can give to your men. Mobilizing troops, as you imagine, can be costly and drain your consumption goods. Men are recruited from different parts of your country, and war is fundamentally tied to your economy. Even if you're potentially weaker than your enemy, if you've prepared for war and built up supplies, then in the long run you may defeat your enemy and take what is yours. Navies are also going to be very important, and especially if you're a big empire, since internal resources may not be able to sustain your nation, and if you don't have enough resources, it can lead to very negative consequences. You therefore personally give your orders to your generals and admirals. Whether they're able to pull it off for you is dependent on a variety of factors, and I'm sure a bit of luck is involved. The cost of war, as you can imagine, can be very damaging to your country, since a significant loss of life can have unintended consequences, with a lack of people contributing to the economy, and devastation in your regions can take a large amount of time to heal. War can also benefit some people, however, like the arms dealers. So there will always be some negatives and positives depending on your strategy. Now, I believe this sort of approach to war gives Victoria 3 a sense of realism, especially when you consider the time period for this game. Historically, it definitely makes sense, and we're no longer in the days of petty squabbles between Frankfurt and Ulm, having maybe 1 or 2 battles. Instead, we are in the age of when big empires collided, and both significantly drained the other's resources. Now, what are the consequences of having something like this? Well, one far-fetched example, but nevertheless relevant, is in football games. In FIFA, you're able to manage a football team and play as them as well, so you could potentially smash United as Exeter City 10-0, which of course is completely unrealistic, but still may be fun for the player. Football Manager, on the other hand, doesn't allow you to do this, and it's dependent on your strategy with the football club. There's always a bit of chance involved with whether you win or lose. A key strength of having this sort of approach means the game can still be interesting over time, if there's always a chance that you may succeed or fail. Maybe people would play their campaigns for longer in EE4 if this sort of war mechanic was implemented. Sometimes you just won't be able to foresee what will happen, but if you always smash up the AI and you 100% know you will win the game, it can become very boring. The success of this mechanic in Victoria 3 is, however, massively dependent on whether it's balanced. Implementing a war mechanic that is unbalanced may make the game unplayable and just not fun. Another thing to consider as well is the multiplayer aspect of it. If you can't directly attack your friends, and instead have to rely more on strategy, will multiplayer be as fun? Regardless, I'm excited for it, and think it's a breath of fresh air, and will make the game unique in its own way. The next aspect I want to discuss is the internal management of your country. The mechanics they've added here is the main selling point of Victoria 3, and I believe it's what people loved about Victoria 2. This is going to be one of the most developed games in terms of economic complexity, with them adding loads of aspects to it, from technology to the population system to the markets. Having a country building game is something that will certainly appeal to some Paradox players who love to play tall. Sadly, we can't go through all the aspects, or we'd be here all day, so I've chosen the most interesting parts. The population system will be advanced and more in depth than ever, with lots of different professions, classes, and over time you'll be able to make decisions in order to shape your population the way you want it, depending on your goals. For example, you might want to have a drive in education and get your population to produce certain goods, making you rich, with the basic economics of supply and demand. Markets, goods, employment, institutions, all will be part of Victoria 3. I personally believe the complexity of it, with lots going on all the time, will give the players an interesting experience of trying to balance the country. Studying economics at university, I'm impressed at the length they've gone to in order to give you this experience, and I can't wait to try this aspect out in the game. In terms of diplomacy, the relations you have now with other countries will be far more intricate. Countries will need to gain prestige over time if you are to influence the world and become a great power. You can get prestige through several factors, such as the country tier, the economy, and the size of the army and navy, which fundamentally makes sense. Relations will also have an impact on what decisions you can choose with other countries, and being an aggressor can gain you a bad reputation with the great powers of the world. This is definitely like other Paradox games. However, something a little different in Victoria 3 diplomacy is the new mechanic of diplomatic plays. This is now a more complicated form of diplomacy with other countries, and it occurs in phases. For example, you state you want another country's territory, and they have to respond or back down. Other countries can also join in on the diplomacy. This is definitely the best part I've read about Victoria 3, and makes diplomacy complicated but interesting. In comparison to other strategy games, Paradox games are popular because of the interesting diplomacy you can have with other nations, and Victoria 3 takes it a step further, having progressive diplomacy over time, rather than a click of a button and war. So looking at the most important features of this game, will it be any good? I think even though they are taking a risk with the war side of Victoria 3, and getting rid of the tactical element of it, there's a considerable payoff to be had there, with a lot of people potentially enjoying the strategy side of it, provided they can balance this game properly, which will definitely be more crucial in this game than other Paradox games. I can see no reason why it wouldn't be successful. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, I hope you enjoyed yourself. Make sure to subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you guys next time.